people making Star Wars, including George and his team, they knew about me. So when it came time to look for who was going to play Luke Skywalker, they auditioned everybody. He was in the chair. Once I got into the room and got in front of him, he turned around and he said, "Commander Balok, Corbomite Maneuver." The last thing I wanted to hear as a 16 or 17-year-old young man trying to get an adult job was a reference to something I did when I was a baby. Hi, I'm Clint Howard, and I was in the original Star Trek series. I was also in Deep Space Nine. I was also in Enterprise. Oh yeah, I was also in Discovery. And there's other ones that I'm missing, but I've been in a lot of them. And you're listening to Trek Untold.
Welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. And welcome to the start of the 4th season of Trek Untold. Anyone who's a regular here at this show knows I like to do something big and special for my season premieres, and today we've got a guest unlike any other in the Star Trek universe or beyond. Joining us for this premiere is one of the most prolific character actors of all time, Clint Howard. When I first started the show, this was a guy that's on the top of that list I've talked about so many times, and yeah, we finally got to him today. Aside from a resume that spans decades, starting when he was still in single digits of age, Clint is now officially the only actor to have appeared in every era of Star Trek. One of his first Hollywood roles was as Commander Balok in the TOS episode The Corbomite Maneuver from Season 1. Clint returned 3 decades later to the franchise in Star Trek DS9's famous two-parter Past Tense, where he played a bum named Grady who helps Dax and Bashir in the second part. A few years later, Clint showed up again, this time in Star Trek Enterprise as the Ferengi named Muk, from that really great first season Ferengi episode titled Acquisition. Nearly another 20 years went by, and lo and behold, Clint makes a sneaky cameo in the Season 1 finale of Star Trek Discovery, Will You Take My Hand? Here, Clint played that Creepy Orion who was seemingly just named Creepy Orion, and well, frankly, his role was that he was a creep to Tilly. Fast forward one more time to 2023, and Clint has returned again, most recently playing Buck Martinez in the 2nd season Strange New Worlds episode, Under the Cloak of War. That's 5 roles in Star Trek that literally started when he was a child, probably still with his baby teeth still falling out of his head, all the way up to modern times in the newest series. Try and name another Star Trek actor who's done that. I dare you right now to figure that out. We've had some on this show, in fact, who've done a lot of Trek throughout the decades, but Clint Howard is one from the OG series to today, and that's pretty wild. And FYI, while editing this episode and rewatching it, I totally didn't realize Clint straight up trolled me. He told me, without telling me in this interview, he was going to be in Strange New Worlds, and I didn't even realize that. So proof that Clint Howard might be the greatest actor that's ever walked this green earth. Clint and his brother Ron recently penned a dual autobiography titled The Boys, a memoir of Hollywood and family. This New York Times bestseller chronicles this prolific pair from their start in the industry, the trials and tribulations, as they grew up in Hollywood, and the events that brought them to where they are today in their personal and professional lives. It's an absolutely wonderful read that I really recommend, and we're going to discuss some of what's in that book today, along with a small sampling of some of Clint's other 250 roles that weren't Star Trek. Now, one quick note, this interview was recorded before the current strike that's going on in Hollywood right now, so if you're not up to date on what's happening with that, check out my previous episode all about it, where I had former guests on this show like Armin Shimmerman, Katie Swink, Phil Morris, Lisa Klink, Bertilla Damas, and Tim Lunabus, giving us an insider's peek at why everybody's striking, what they're fighting for, and what we can do to help them out. Clint's Strange New World appearance happened during the strike, so unfortunately, we weren't able to talk about it in this one. Hopefully, once things are resolved, we can try to get him back for a second time to fill in those blanks about his Strange New World's appearance. So, hey, the good news is there's always more coming from Clint Howard. Clint's a man that's done it all, and he's not planning on stopping anytime soon. And he's also an actor that's done a ton of interviews over the years. But I can make you the Trek Untold guarantee, and that's I always find something new for my guests to chat about, and we definitely did that here. I think even Clint was kind of surprised about where we went in this one. So get ready for a chat with one of the most down-to-earth actors whose face you've seen time and time again in so many shows and films. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary pals, the one and only Clint Howard. But before we get into this week's episode, I have to ask you, are you following Trek Untold on social media yet? You can find us over on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, all at Trek Untold, one word with no spaces. You can also become a Patreon supporter for this podcast over at patreon.com/TrekUntold. Here, you can directly contribute to keeping this show running at full power for as low as a few bucks a month. If you do this, you'll have early access to new episodes, the ability to ask future guests questions, check out exclusive merchandise, and other special benefits. We've also got an official merch store and an Amazon store filled with Star Trek goodies. So if you want to rock a Trek Untold t-shirt to the next con you're going to, or order something Star Trek related for yourself or someone else, please use the links in the show notes to help us help you. Shout out to our show sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, makers of fine 3D printed Star Trek inspired toys and accessories for collectors of all kinds. But you'll hear more about them later on. Now, without further ado, let's beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. So on this podcast, I talk to a lot of character actors, and I introduce many of them when they first pop in as you know their face, but not their name. But for today's guest, your name, your face, one of the most recognizable in Hollywood. So Mr. Clint Howard, welcome to Trek Untold. It's an honor to spend some time with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. It was a wonderful introduction, and it's great. So thank you.
Yeah, and we're here today to talk Trek. We're going to talk about some other things, but one of the big things I want to talk about right at the start of this interview here is that you have a new memoirs that you and your brother Ron wrote called The Boys, which it's a window into your journey as child stars all the way through adulthood and the struggles along the way. Great book. I read the whole thing before we did this interview, and I got to ask you, Clint, for folks who don't know, why is it called The Boys?
Well, listen, the Ron and I concocted the idea of doing a book after Dad had passed away. And, Mom died years before Dad passed. And it was sort of a love letter to them. We really wanted to try to express our gratitude and express from our points of view exactly what an amazing set of parents we had. Rance Howard and Gene Howard. And the reason why the book is called The Boys is that's what Mom used to refer to all three of us. Very male-oriented household. We didn't have any sisters. It was just me and Ron and Dad. And I was very rambunctious, not in a negative way, but I had a lot of energy, and Dad had a lot of energy, and we'd wrestle and we carried on, and Mom would always refer to us as the boys. And so, listen, here is the book, that's a copy of it. It's out. It's HarperCollins. God, proud to say I'm a New York Times bestseller. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. Thank you, for a month. It's now out on paperback. You can still get it at all the major retailers, and it is a good read. Thank you. Ron and I are very proud of it. It also is a great audiobook because, the way Ron and I decided to craft the book was make it a dual narrative.
Yeah.
Ron shares his point of view and his perspective about being a child actor. He was the first in the pipeline, and I came along 5 years later. And I have a perspective, and my perspective is sometimes quite a bit different. I mean, we Ron and I are brothers, and we love each other, but we are different. And so we freely express ourselves. And in the audiobook, he reads his and I read mine. And it makes for a very interesting, entertaining read. Listen.
Yeah, I really enjoy that ping pong storytelling in the book between you and your brother. And it kind of made me curious to find out, how did you guys actually write the book? I mean, were you guys kind of like having a dialogue together? Do you each just take turns? Because it is very much like a conversation.
Well, Ron and I, we attacked the project of writing The Boys a little bit like, developing a film. What are the best stories? what stories are people going to be attracted to, and what stories do we feel impassioned to tell? And where my point of view and Ron's point of view differ, or the interesting perspective, you got to remember, when he was 10, I was 5. When he was 14, I was 9. He was going through, he went through puberty long before I did, you know. And so we had a different perspective on things, and we just felt like that when we started talking to publishers, that's what they landed on. And listen, it is a business. We went and we went around, we developed the idea of the book, and then we went to different publishers to see who would be interested and what they liked about it. So we got feedback. We also got wonderful help from a writer named David Camp. David Camp was part of our kind of team, and he's a Vanity Fair writer. He also is a novelist, and he really got it. He got what Ron and I were trying to do. And so he sort of was a preliminary editor. Ron would write, I would write, and then David would read it and then point us towards making a deeper dive, as he used to say. And also, Ron and I both knew, and we got encouragement from the HarperCollins people and from David Camp, is that let's describe, what was it really like? Let's make these things like scenes.
Yeah.
What was it like to be in Jackson Hole, Wyoming that year? And, the details. And so it's not just us telling the broad stroke stories, but we're interested in what were the little nuanced details that we remembered at those various ages. So, that was it. And then of course we got down to the fourth quarter, and the actual editor from HarperCollins came into the picture. And my goodness, I wasn't giving the literary world that much credit. I thought, okay, book the deal, let's go, let it back away, we're going to write it. But we got some great, our editor was a guy named Morrow, and he made the book 25% better with his notes in the fourth quarter. I was really impressed. I thought, God, he did, David Camp helped us, and Morrow helped us. And again, Ron and I are really, really proud of the way it turned out. And we're really happy that we now have this memoir that we can share, that includes this very unique, extraordinary life, being child actress. Listen, I started acting when I was 2 years old. I've been a professional for almost 62 years now.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is.
Yeah. It's a wonderful time capsule, not just for the Howard family, but also for Hollywood itself, and seeing what it's like back then to where it is now. It's such a different kind of experience. I do want to touch on one of the things that's in the book, though, and I think, in fact, you talked about this on the Gilbert Gottfried podcast some time ago, and that's you and your brother never really talked shop growing up. And I'm just wondering, how did you guys not do that? I mean, you're both in the business. How did you not ever communicate about that kind of thing?
Well, I don't really know why, but I tell you what, we did talk a little shop as we got older, and Ron started to get interested in making films. When Ron was interested in making films, I remember us talking about movies and talking about how the tricks were done.
Mm-hmm.
Famously, Ron made a blood and guts little video called Guns, Gads, Guns, Guts, and Gore, or something like that. And it was basically a card game that ends up everybody gets killed. And it was a 3-4 minute short film. Sam Peckinpah had made The Wild Bunch, and Ron and I were really fascinated by the way they did the blood, the guts, the blood spray, and so we tried to recreate that. But as kids, listen, I enjoyed being on the set. I understood that we were doing something that was both we were making money at it, and it was fun. But when we got home, it was about the Dodgers or the Lakers or, whatever we were doing in school. Or it's just, listen, Ron and I have had adult conversations about this, and it is kind of amazing. Like, Ron never ran lines with me.
Yeah.
He just never did. And it's, well, Dad was there. I mean, Mom and Dad, God bless them, Rance and Gene Howard, they did this. They were awesome parents. They were leaders. They led with love. Dad's story, which is why people should read the book. I mean, Dad's story was so amazing because he was a farm boy. He was a farm boy from Oklahoma. He wasn't raised particularly well, and then he has this dream of being in the entertainment business, and he goes about this dream, and he has a little bit of luck, and then he has these two kids, and they come out to California, and Ron shows remarkable talent. He ends up on the Andy Griffith Show, and that's pretty heady stuff. My dad was 30 years old, and listen, we lovingly called him a sophisticated hick, which is a term that Mom gave him, because my dad in a lot of ways was kind of hickish, but he had this great sensibility, and he wasn't intimidated by anybody. And when Dad got into that heady kind of company where he was around successful Hollywood people, he just, he didn't back down. He wouldn't let anybody intimidate him. And he didn't do it with, I'm going to kick your ass. He did it with just such dignity and such strength that, my God, everybody, so respected my dad and my mom too. So, Ron and I were really in a sweet spot.
Yeah. The book, it's very uplifting. It's very heartfelt. It's funny at times, but it's also brutally honest. And I mean, the book does go into a little bit about some of your struggles with dependency, which I never really knew about, honestly. So, it was interesting reading about that and hearing how you worked through that. For you now, this book is a little bit more, I guess, in depth for yourself. So was it difficult having to look back in the past and kind of have to dig up some of these tough topics?
Not at all, Matthew. Listen, first of all, you obviously never heard me speak at a meeting. I've been in recovery for a long time, and I cherish the anonymity of all 12-step groups, and I'm going to be very careful as I go through this. But I freely and openly shared about my story at dozens and dozens of speaker meetings in various 12-step groups. So, it wasn't new to me. I figured I had been through hell, and the best thing to do was to share, because at the end of the day, my God, if something I say might keep somebody from friggin' stepping off the cliff and landing in hell, it kind of it always made me feel better. It always made me feel better, and also the truth will set you free. One thing I learned in my whole recovery deal was, telling little lies ends up just, catching up with you, because a little lie then rolls into a big lie, then finally you got this big giant lie that you're living, and you're just going to F yourself up. So anyway, no, the answer to, talking about, I smoked weed when I was, 13 or 14 years old, and started drinking, and immediately drank out of the bottle, by the bottle. For whatever reason, whether it was genetics or a combination of things, I just got bit with the bug of alcoholism. And, as a young kid, shoot, it was 16, 17, 18 years old. Like a lot of kids. Listen, like a lot of kids. So anyway, I'm grateful that, Mom and Dad gave me a lot of guidance. I got a lot of guidance from a lot of great men in recovery. And, here I am today, 64 years old, alive and ticking.
Yeah, well, congratulations on your continued sobriety, and you got a great perspective on it too. Just being able to, share your stories and give it forward. Make sure that someone else who's in that hole can get themselves out of it. So, thank you for being open to doing that.
Oh
too.
yeah. No, listen, my part of the boys, when I was in my teenage years, we didn't aim it to be all of a sudden some sort of tell-all or some sort of, it was just my recovery stories. They're a part of me until I was 31 years old. So listen, I skidded along bedrock for a long time.
Well, you made it. And for folks who want to read more about the book, check out The Boys. We're going to have links in my show notes for how you can pick that
Oh,
book up.
cool.
And there it
One
is. Clint's got
more.
in his hand right now. There's The Boys, a memoir of Hollywood and family. Now I can say the full title because I'm looking right at it. So, yeah, thank you, Clint. And, obviously, I want to talk a whole lot more about tons of other things in your career because your career is so massive. But this is a Star Trek show, so you got to start digging into the Trek. And it's funny because really, Star Trek is one of the earliest things on your resume because your very first appearance in Star Trek is the very first season, and that's, I believe, it's like the second episode of the first full season, which is the Corbomite Maneuver. You played Commander Balok. It's a really fun episode. Can you just kind of tell us the story from the beginning of how you booked the gig?
Oh boy, how I booked the gig. Well, first of all, I wasn't a newcomer at all. You have to realize that by 1965, 1966, I had been acting professionally for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, you've been
I
on the
mean,
Andy Griffith
I've
Show a few times
done,
also, right by then?
I did a couple episodes of The Fugitive. I did a wonderful episode of a Bonanza called All Ye His Saints, and it was a Christmas episode, and it was the first season they did when they went color, and when Pernell Roberts left the Ponderosa. So I did this episode. It was written by a great writer named Bill Blinn, who wrote what was the football movie Brian Song. William Blinn, Bill Blinn wrote that. Well, he wrote, as a very young man, he wrote an episode of Bonanza called All Ye His Saints. And I was the lead of that episode, and I couldn't have been more than 5 years old.
Wow.
So, with the help of my dad kind of tutoring me and I wouldn't even say he was teaching or coaching. It was just, he was like a child actor whisperer. My dad had this wonderful ability to boil down what a person needs to do as an actor to prepare, and it was so simple, and I learned it, and I learned a lot of it by osmosis because I watched my brother do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I auditioned, and I remember auditioning for Star Trek, and because I remember we practiced outside, and Dad had read the script and knew there was going to be a lot of razzmatazz, and I was going to be in a kind of a silly costume, and I was playing this in 600-year-old. I was a 600-year-old alien commander, and I prepared the material. They told Dad and I originally that they were going to run my voice through a synthesizer, and that's how they were going to alter my voice. And so, okay, well, I needed to learn the dialogue, of course. And as it turns out, they didn't use a synthesizer. They found a wonderful voice actor who did my voice. And I'm brain locking on the fellow's name now. It's easily retrievable. The man who did my voice was absolutely phenomenal. And I can never give enough credit to him because, he gave the character that kind of adult vibe that there was no way I was going to do it. And also another thing too, I mentioned this a lot, they asked my dad if I might be willing to shave my head bald
I was
because
curious about that.
they had seen Balok as being a shaved head. And that was a non-starter for me. I was in the second grade, and I was not going to go to my second grade class with a shaved head. I was not going to, that was a humiliation beyond humiliations. So, I remember this, and I went in to do a test for the bald cap, and that went really well. I love the smell of spirit gum, the chemicals they used. I really enjoyed that, if you know what I mean. And so we did the test, and then, well, first of all, I got the audition.
Yeah.
I auditioned for it, and listen, I had the chops, obviously, so they booked me, and then we prepared. My dad was always big on preparation. I was always the most prepared actor there on the set, even as a little guy. And there were times in my career when, as a child, that I would look at these other adults fumbling for their dialogue, and I'd wonder, well, what's wrong with them? Why can't they get it? Why don't they practice? Why don't they do a better job? This guy's pretty stiff. And I remember saying that as a young boy, and I'm a little embarrassed because, my acting chops was not awesome, but for a kid, I was good. So anyway, so it comes time to do the show, and it was a day's work. And I do have some faint memories. One memory I do remember is they brought me to the set. They showed me where I was going to do my scene, because they were filming, the crew was filming on another side of the soundstage. And so I didn't meet anybody. I was there on my set, and then all of a sudden I heard the two bells that signified they had cut. What in show business, on sound stages, when they roll camera, they do a bell. And then when they cut camera, they do two bells. And I'll never forget, Matthew, I heard the two bells. And then I felt and saw the crew and some of the cast members start walking towards my set. And I remember feeling pretty good, like, okay, I'm getting ready to go to work here. Enough with the standing around. And we started doing the stuff. And the rehearsal, everything was going good. The prop man then poured the Tranya, and I saw right away that it was pink grapefruit juice out of a tin can, which there ain't no way I'm taking a swig of warm pink grapefruit juice out of a tin can. It just, come on, Dad, why couldn't they put, apple juice or grape juice or not grapefruit juice? And
That's the secret, is grapefruit juice.
Dad had the prop man pour him a big water glass of it. And my dad in front of me drank that down. He went, it's good. Clint, you're gonna drink that pink grapefruit juice and you're gonna like it. And if you see the show, and I did, didn't kill me. Didn't taste very good. And as you can tell on the show, I had such an aversion to it. When I take a sip of it, when I take a sip of the Tranya, I barely put it to my lips. I mean, just like a fellow drinking some sort of exotic space liquor, just a little dab will do you, that Tranya. And, had a good time. Cut print, check the gate. Thank you. It's a wrap on little Clint Howard. And I went home. Didn't think much of it. It was a fun experience. Oh, the one more thing I'll add is the little costume that they had me in was itchy, and oh man, I remember the boots were too tight, and it was like a kind of a sequins material, but it had no lining.
It looked a little rough for sure. For you, just as a viewer, it looked pretty hard to wear
and stuff. And the little crown, it was like they measured my head before they put the skull cap on me. So it was like it fit when I was just, normal. And then when I put the skull cap on and they added, a little bit around my head, the thing was tight. So it was not the most comfortable outfit that I've ever acted in, And then when it came out, it was fun. God, being in a space thing, science fiction, but I did not give it a second thought. I had no clue at all that, over 50 years later, 55 years later, that people would honor my work at that level, and I have a couple of further stories about that. And, one thing, Matthew, it took me a long time to really appreciate any of the work I did as a child. In this perspective, when I became an adult, I wanted to make my mark as an adult. My child career was my childhood career, and I would just assume that people not discuss it. Listen, I was in a TV series with a bear, for crying out loud, which isn't a very, very adult thing,
I mean, I think it's pretty cool.
Well,
personally.
Yeah, no, wait, now listen, my attitude has changed almost 180 degrees. In fact, it has changed in 180 degrees because, I recognized, and I was probably in my mid 40s when I recognized this, that my work as a child was was amazing. And the fact that, almost everybody in America grew up watching me, which it's not, I'm not throwing my shoulder out, patting myself on the back. It's just a fact that it's a legacy that is good. It's a good legacy. And so, but early on in my career, I would just as soon not have people talk about me pulling on a bear's chain, or not have people talking about me as a little baby in Star Trek. Now, this is a story that I've told before, but I'm going to tell you. I auditioned for Star Wars, the original Star Wars, in 1975 or 1976. I was 16, 17 years old. And, my brother Ron had worked with George Lucas on American Graffiti. So the people making Star Wars, including George and his team, they knew about me. So when it came time to look for who was going to play Luke Skywalker, they auditioned everybody. I mean, this is way before there was videotape auditions. So they were literally having everybody come to Fox Studios, and they were auditioning. They must have auditioned hundreds of people. When I was there at the Fox Studio lot, there had to have been 40 or 50 guys standing around, and, just almost like a cattle call. It wasn't a pure cattle call, but because, we had auditions and we were sort of selected. But I remember seeing Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill was behind me. I was in front, and I was, and it was good. I had auditioned with Mark Hamill a couple of times on various projects. Listen, we, as kids, we auditioned a lot. And so anyway, it came time for them to call my name, and I went in, and I walk into the room, and it was a beautiful room at 20th Century Fox. And I look over, and Francis Ford Coppola is sitting in a chair right there. And Jesus, Francis just takes up a room. Francis owns a room. I've had an opportunity to spend time with him, and he's just he's a beautiful dude, and he just, he's magnetic. And so anyway, I look at him, and I'm, wow, Francis is here. And then I look over, and I see Fred Roos. Fred Roos had been a casting director on the Andy Griffith Show. And Fred Roos was a colleague of George and Francis. Got another guy named Gino Havens was in the room, who I knew. He worked on American Graffiti. So I knew him, and he was a guy, his one leg was longer than the other, and he kind of had a funny way of walking. And so he was a memorable character, but I didn't see George. George he was in a big leather chair. George is not a very big man. And he was in a big leather chair, and his whole body was obscured by this chair. And it was like this. He was in the chair, and once I got into the room and got in front of him, he turned around and he said, "Commander Balok, Corbomite Maneuver." And my next thought, Matthew, was, George, I didn't say it, George, get a friggin' life. Because the last thing I wanted to hear as a 16 or 17-year-old young man trying to get an adult job was a reference to something I did when I was a baby. It just, now I'd have a different perspective on it. But back then, anyway, I obviously didn't get the role. Mark Hamill got it. Mark was a wonderful Luke Skywalker. Friggin', he nailed it. George nailed it. It's a friggin' piece of movie history that will never, ever, ever be topped. And so that was my moment of getting faced with, well, I worked as a little kid, and it's coming back to haunt me at the time. I mean, that was my thinking. I was wrong. George Lucas was honoring me. I left a memory in George Lucas's mind that was powerful enough for him to bring it up, in a good way. So anyway, that was me making, kind of a mental mistake when I was 16 or 17 years old. And I started accepting it. I go to Star Trek conventions, and I go to horror conventions. And, just over time, just sort of, I kind of had an awakening by an educational variety. I just came to realize these people, I mean something to these people. I've left an impression on these people with my work and my circumstance that is positive. And God, if I don't celebrate that, I'm an a-hole. So I do celebrate it.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is sponsored by Triple Fiction Productions. Celebrating 15 years in business in 2023, TFP creates 3D printed Star Trek and sci-fi inspired items that fit into any collection. Whether you're a cosplayer who wants a Starfleet phaser, a Bajoran tricorder, or a Klingon dagger, or a toy collector looking for that special accessory or diorama to make your figures truly stand out, Triple Fiction Productions has exactly what you need. And for you figure fanatics, that includes products that are the perfect size for Galoob, Mego, Playmates, and everything in between. All products are 3D printed in the US, with new designs constantly being updated on their website. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, where the more you order, the more discounts you receive. TFP also has a pay what you want section, where clearance or misprinted items are available at a discounted price. Best of all, every product can be shipped worldwide. As a special bonus for listeners of this show, Trek Untold has a special discount code just for you. Enter Untold10 at checkout for 10% off of all orders with no minimum purchase required. That's 10% off using Untold10. To see all of their products, head to triple-fictionproductions.net. Or to stay up to date on their newest products, find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Triple Fiction Productions, where something is only impossible until it happens.
Hey, I'm Licia Naff, aka Ensign Sonia Gomez from Star Trek TNG, and now Captain Sonia Gomez on lower decks with her own ship, the Archimedes. Yay! I finally got a promotion after 25 years. So anyway, I'm here to talk about drivebydogooders.org. It's a little charity I run where we go to the outskirts of Skid Row, and from our car windows, we hand out basic human essentials like water, wipes, Coldstream cheese, socks, tarps, masks, t-shirts, things to keep people warm. So we just think that everyone deserves clean water, some protein, and a way to clean themselves, especially during Corona. We also hand out masks to those who really need it, who live in tents on the street, mainly the disabled and elderly who have a really hard time getting to services. And we do all of this with no agenda, just pure giving, no overhead. If you'd like to go to the website and donate, it's 100% tax deductible. And if you click on the donate button, you can go right to the $35 option and pick a signed autograph picture of either the Star Trek The Next Generation or Lower Decks, or Total Recall, where I played the three-breasted mutant hooker on Mars, and that's the X-rated version. Put in the comments section your address and anything you'd like me to write, and I'll personally inscribe it and mail it off to you immediately. And again, that's drivebydogooders.org. Captain Sonia Gomez signing off.
I mean, I gotta tell you, Clint, I'm really, tangentially related to this interview. The first time I remember really seeing much about you or hearing much about you was, in fact, on Gilbert Gottfried's podcast. And since that day, I think that was one of the things that sort of did start to inspire me to work on this very podcast. Hearing your stories about Trek and hearing your stories about the business all the way back then. So I'm happy you've embraced it and you've embraced that lifestyle. And I've just been so fan friendly, because that's an amazing thing to offer to us.
Well, listen, if I can make somebody's life a little happier, as long as they don't invade, as long as they don't do something that's, either, just alcohol induced. I don't want to just always blame alcohol, but most of the time, if I have a bad encounter with a fan, usually it has something to do with friggin' somebody being too liquored up, you know? And that's okay too. I mean, but it's just, listen, people need to realize, fans, people that recognize me need to realize that, I have a space. I have a space that if you invade it, it's not a good thing. And especially with my wife and my daughter, I certainly, people need to, I think, and 99.9% of the people are completely respectful. Maybe the percentage isn't quite that high, but it's very high, and God bless them. I mean, Jesus, if I saw a famous baseball player, like if I had a chance to meet Jim Palmer, I was a huge Baltimore Orioles fan when I was a kid, I mean, Jen Palmer, would completely geek out, or a professional golfer, Lee Trevino or Tiger Woods. I would absolutely geek out. My God, I'm talking to Lee Trevino. So anyway, that I've certainly had a rearrangement of my attitude in terms of the fans.
Oh, that's awesome, because you are a seriously deep part of the history, not just on the TV shows, but for me, Clint, I am a giant super Star Trek nerd, and I'm also, that means, a giant super Star Trek collector. And I've been waiting to ask you this for, I think, the longest time now. You have an action figure of yourself.
Yes.
It's a 2-pack with your puppet. What do you think about that figure? Does it look like you? Are you happy with it?
Oh, yeah, it's tickled. Can I break away for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hold on. Matthew, I've had a hobby for a long time, starting in 2015, and I make snow globes.
I never knew that.
This is the first snow globe that I made. And
that is so cool.
That right there, that's Balok and the puppet, and they came right out of the box. They came right out of the box, and I found something really magical about snow globes, and I've actually made a couple of I made one solo of Balok. But this was my very first snow globe that I made in 2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
that's an awesome job, by the way. That's so cool.
Yeah. Thank you. It was fun to do. I don't know. At the time in my life, because of my hips, I had to quit playing golf. And I had been such an avid golfer that I really needed to have something to do. And I literally kind of was thinking, well, what do I do? I either do dioramas, I could try to paint, but I'm really not that good of a painter. I'm a good artist, but in terms of my limitations with my painting skills, and for whatever reason, I really didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to learn how to paint or learn oil or whatever. So I thought, what can I do? And I don't know how it happened. I saw it on the internet. This outfit was selling these do-it-yourself snow globe kits. And I decided to take a whack at it. And I ended up, 21, I've done 21 snow globes. And the fellow that was selling me the kits, this was several years ago, the fellow that was selling me the kits when I bought like my 23rd snow globe kit, he said, I just want to tell you something, Clint. Nobody's ever bought more than 2. So cool. It's called an obsession, I guess,
Everybody's got one. I got Star Trek, you got snow globes. It's all good. No
there you
judgment
go.
here.
There you go.
So let's jump now ahead a few decades later in your Star Trek time. And again, I feel like we're glossing over so much of your other career here, but that's what the book is for. So folks, read the boys. But let's jump ahead now to your next Star Trek appearance. That's in Deep Space Nine. It's the second part of one of the most important DS9 episodes of all time, one of the most iconic ones, Past Tense. In that one, you play a vagrant named Grady. And I wanted to ask here, is this a role that you had auditioned for, or had you auditioned for Star Trek again since? And I should start first with, had you previously auditioned for Trek since you did the original series? And were the producers aware that you had been in the original Trek when you auditioned for DS9?
Well, actually, I don't know. I could go no, no, and no, or I'll tell you about it. I had done the original Star Trek, and years had passed, and I'd become an adult. And then Next Generation happened, and Star Trek happened. Deep Space Nine happened. And my agents at the time were aware of a rule that the Star Trek shows had, and that was they were not going to use anybody from the original series. That at that time, that was just sort of a rule. They didn't want to cross boundaries. And so there were a couple of times when roles came down and they said, wait, he was in the original show. There's no reason for him to come in and audition because we're not booking anybody. And then, I don't know, a year or so passed, and I got a call from my agent. I remember the call, and they said, "Oh, we got an audition for you down at Deep Space Nine." And I said, "Wait, you got to remember, I can't take the job. They won't hire me. Why do I want to go in and audition when they find out I was in the series?" They go, "Don't worry about it. They probably won't even remember." And they didn't. And, it was a small little role. Grady was only in it for a brief period of time. And I went down just as a character actor. Nobody made a big deal about it at the time. No, Jonathan Frakes. In fact, I remember that day really vividly because it wasn't day, it was night. And it was a television production company that was so far behind schedule that I got a call to go to work at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't work till like 2 a.m.
Wow.
And Jonathan Frakes later came and apologized to me and goes, listen, I am sorry. I was so tired. I was a zombie when we were directing that scene, and thank God it turned out the way it turned out. But, they were as television programs can happen, when they get behind schedule, once in a while, the production manager just says, okay, we're going to pay the overtime. We got to go. And they worked these enormously ridiculous hours. And I remember doing the scene. If I remember correctly, there weren't a lot of humans in Deep Space Nine, were there?
There were a good amount, but in the episode that you were in, it took place in 2024 on Earth, so it was a little bit more contemporary.
Yeah. The riots.
Yeah, the Bell riots.
The Bell riots, yes. And I know, and I just, listen, by that time, I was a character actor, and I played nuts before, and this guy was, this guy needed to be perceived as a real nutcase, and I remember doing it, and it was fun, but I didn't give it much, I didn't make a big thing about it. It wasn't until I did Enterprise that the Star Trek people embraced the fact that, hey, we're using guys from the old shows, and Jeffrey Combs and Johnny Phillips,
Ethan Phillips.
Ethan. He goes by Johnny, but yeah, we played the Ferengis.
Yeah, which is a great episode too, by the way. I hadn't seen that one in so long, and I rewatched that one, and I was just like, oh my God, because I love Ferengi episodes, and this one is a standout.
Yeah, no, I had a blast doing that. First of all, because of the makeup, and who was the lead? Who was the lead Ferengi? Ari, not Ari.
Oh, you talking about Armin Shimmerman?
Armin, yes. I wore Armin's piece. Armin has a big head. I've got a gigantic cranium, and so does Armin. And so they didn't want to go to the trouble of molding brand new masks. So because it was basically a mask piece. There was my face stuck through, but most of it was prosthetic. And I wore Armin's headpiece, and still the makeup was so extensive that I went on, penalty turnaround. I got paid probably twice as much on that episode, because if they hire in Screen Actors Guild on productions, if they don't give you 12 hours off, they have to pay you a substantial penalty, like, $900 or $1,000. Back then it was $800. And they used to call it, well, we're going to buy you a couch, Clint. We got to call you in 10 hours. We got to call you in. I know it's really late at night, but we're calling you in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're going to buy you a couch. So I think they bought me 3 couches on that episode, which was really fun. And another thing about working on the Enterprise, first of all, Ethan and Jeffrey, I know, and it was fun, and it was just being around them was a blast. Doing the Ferengi language was a little funky, but we slugged through it and got what we gave them what they wanted. But Scott Bakula was, of course, the commander, the captain of the Enterprise, right?
Yep.
Well, I had worked with him on a TV series called Gung Ho. They had done. The movie Gung Ho had come out with Michael Keaton, and then they did a TV series that only lasted for 13 episodes. And they replayed. Michael Keaton didn't want to be in the series, obviously, but they hired Scott. And so Scott and I became friends working on Gung Ho, the series. And then although we didn't have any scenes together in Enterprise, he certainly popped down to the set when I was filming, and we, shot the bull a little bit and said hi and caught up. And he's a great dude. Scott's a wonderful guy. Working on Enterprise was a wonderful experience too. And by that point, then they were celebrating. the fact that now they were getting to hire little Balok. They were getting to hire Clint Howard.
Bringing back the
And-
legacy actors.
Yeah, legacy actors, I guess, is now what they call it,
Yeah. And not to correct you, but you actually did have a scene with Scott Bakula. I think you had a few in that Enterprise one, and one of them I know because I was going to ask you because you actually got to punch Captain Archer as your Ferengi character Muk. I don't know if you remember that.
Really?
Yeah,
Jesus. I'd have to go back and see the episode.
yeah. Well, it's worth it. I definitely recommend it.
I don't recall. I recall Scott coming down and giving me a hug and, us shooting the bull. I don't remember us actually digging in. Listen, this is not an excuse, Matthew, but I'll tell you something. There's so much makeup going on. And when that happens to an actor, and then they put false teeth in your mouth, you get a little myopic. You get a little frigging, it's hard. That one thing working on the Grinch was, a very interesting experience. And watching Jim Carrey invent this hilarious, wonderfully rich character in all of that makeup and in all of that wardrobe was absolutely phenomenal, because when you spend 3 or 4 hours in the makeup chair, spend another 45 minutes getting into your costume, and then they pop contact lenses in your eyes, and then they walk you to the set, the last thing you want to be is funny. And yet Jim, friggin' hats off to him, man, because that I can speak from complete experience. When you got that makeup on, it ain't fun. And yet, listen, he had a job to do and he did it.
I mean, you've worn makeup a lot throughout your career. You mentioned the Grinch, talking Star Trek. Which one would you say was the most arduous to get in and out of?
Well, the one-dayers were hard. The one-dayers stand out. I mean, the Star Trek was the first Star Trek doesn't really count because it's just a hairpiece. We did the Who makeup so much. I got so used to it. I had this wonderful makeup guy, Christian Tinsley, who's gone ahead and had a wonderful career in the special effects world. He was my makeup man. Each actor on the Grinch had their own makeup man, which is pretty phenomenal. There was 35 makeup men on the set of the Grinch, and with Rick Baker leading the charge and his whole team. It was awesome, great experience. So that became easy. I made a little horror movie called Ticks, and it was where finally at the end of the money thing is I get infested with these big giant ticks, and a tick blows out the side of my face, and it's right after I say I'm infested. And for people that found the movie, it's an enjoyable moment. But I'll tell you, that was a hard day because that was full. It was one day I had a blood bladder kind of molded into my face. So when it came time to do that effect, it was really, there wasn't kind of acting stiff. So I would say that probably was the most detailed. And also anytime they have to do a plaster cast mold of your head, the preparation, when you have to go in 2 weeks before and literally they wrap your face in plaster of Paris and do a mold with finally your eyes are covered, you got 2 little nose holes and a little straw to breathe. And that's from a standpoint of claustrophobia, which I'm not overtly claustrophobic, but I think anybody's a little claustrophobic. I mean, I couldn't wait to get out of that thing. It's like after it's set and then they take it off, my instinct is to help them, let's get this thing off faster.
Yes, and this kind of reminds me too, I didn't actually get a chance to ask you this when we talked about the Corbomite Maneuver, but here on Enterprise, this is the first time you're actually aboard a Starfleet ship. So I don't know if you recall this from back in your original series days as well, but did you have a chance to check out the bridge, if you recall, and did you sit in the captain's chair?
Oh, well, yeah, I checked out the bridge. In fact, the Howard family photo album is filled with mini Polaroids of me on the deck, standing there. There was an orange railing. There's a famous shot of me kind of standing in the orange railing. And I believe that for whatever reason, I had an aversion. I didn't want to sit in the captain's chair. I don't know why. I looked at it. I saw it. I saw the dials. I was mesmerized. Listen, the fun thing about show business is, you see the set, and you've got like these control panels where you see the lights can come on, and then if you just run around back, you can see the guts of it. You can see how it gets done. You can see that there's electrician there wiring it and stuff. So, being in on the tricks, as a child and as an adult, is big fun for me. I mean, I enjoy it. It's one great thing about show business is when you're inside the magic trick, it's a blast.
So you're telling me Scotty isn't back there actually in a warp core working in engineering?
No.
You're blowing my mind, Clint. This is, oh my God.
No. And sick bay, nobody wants to get sick at sick bay.
Hey everybody, we'll get right back to the interview in 1 second, but I wanted to remind you all to check out Trek Untold over at Patreon. Patreon is the best way to directly support creators of things you like through a monthly subscription of an amount that you can choose. Trek Untold has a few different tiers already with different benefits, ranging from early access to episodes, the ability to ask a future guest questions, exclusive merchandise, and other bonuses that I'd love to offer, but first I need to grow that Patreon community to do that. Trek Untold has been around since mid-2020 and has grown a ton since then, thanks to listeners and viewers like you. Through a platform like Patreon, you can help me keep improving the quality of each episode and keep bringing you new interviews with folks that make the Star Trek universe what it is. If this community can grow more over on Patreon, I can offer new perks like watch parties, exclusive Trek Untold episodes, being able to directly interact with guests, and other things, but in order to do that, I need to know my audience wants these things. The best way to tell me what you want is by supporting us on Patreon, so please, check us out at patreon.com/TrekUntold today and become a bigger part of the Trek Untold family. And now, back to the interview. So Clint, as I'm sure you are already aware, you are in a very special club of folks who did the original series and then did the 90s, early 2000s series. But you're also in an even smaller club, which I think you might just be by yourself in the fact that you did the original series and Discovery in this modern era of Star Trek. And I gotta tell you, watching it, when I was watching Discovery, I saw you pop up. I marked out. That's what we call it in pro wrestling. I flipped out. I was like, oh my God, they got Clint Howard. That is so cool. I gotta ask, again, in this case, they know who you are, I'm sure by now, right? Did they call you in because they wanted Clint Howard back on Star Trek? Or was this kind of just an audition for something that maybe would pan out?
Oh, no. By this point, I'm not really auditioning for Star Trek. And I'll tell you what, Akiva Goldsman, who I've known for a long time, and Akiva wrote A Beautiful Mind for my brother, and also wrote Cinderella Man, two movies that I was involved in. And in fact, the first time I really met Akiva in person, it was at my niece's wedding, Bryce. When Bryce got married, God, a long time ago now. Akiva and I were there, and we shared this moment that it was an unforgettable moment of this absurd situation that we both witnessed and we laughed about. But Akiva, I always consider Akiva a really good dude, and he reached out. He was the showrunner for Discovery, and he reached out to me and he said, I have a really interesting idea, and would you be willing to do it? And he pitched it to me, and I said, of course. Listen, I'm an actor. I'm a character actor. And by this point, listen, I was in the William Shatner roast on Comedy Central.
Yep.
I've completely bought into the celebration of it all and not guarding some sort of weird, aversion to it. So anyway, it was Akiva that asked me to do it. And I'll tell you, I hope I don't get in trouble when I say this, but that episode of Discovery, what you guys ended up seeing on screen is not what we shot.
Really?
The whole reason why Akiva asked me to come on and play that creepy Orion character is they had written a Tranya reference into that scene. And it was, if you remember the episode, the young ensign got intoxicated by the volcanic vapors that I was breathing. It was in a kind of a seedy nightclub scene, and I was whiffing these vapors, and the young ensign, she takes a whiff of these vapors and sort of passes out, and she comes to, And in the script, she came to and she said, what happened? I'm parched. And I instantly, this creepy Orion character, after hearing that this person is parched, I reach back and I hold a glass of a beverage up to her, and I go, Tranya. And so that was what it was all about. It was the Tranya reference. And it was funny. We did it. I thought we nailed it. And for whatever reason, the producers did not want to make that cross reference. They thought it didn't work. Maybe it would spoil the atmosphere of the scene, and which is, the producer's choice. Actors don't have final cut. So they eliminated it. But, anyway, there's, and listen, I'm not going to go into any more details except to say I'm not done being in Star Trek.
Good. That's what I want to hear, because I was curious. We got to get you in Lower Deck somehow. I don't know if anybody's talked to you, and I know if anybody has, you can't say anything because we want to keep our kneecaps intact. But yes. I mean, I would love to see you show up again in Lower Decks or something
all
else.
All different worlds, all sorts of worlds can spin around. The Star Trek, I love the Star Trek universe. I was really, really impressed with what JJ did making that movie. That when they retooled Star Trek, and a guy named what was the guy that played young Captain Kirk when he was a boy, Jimmy Bennett. I had done a movie with Jimmy Bennett called Alabama Moon, and Jimmy had told me that he had played young Captain Kirk driving a Corvette.
Yeah,
he played like a 10-year-old boy driving a Corvette. And I saw the movie, and whenever I know people that are in movies, I find it fascinating and interesting, and I root for them. But I just thought that JJ did a great job with that movie, and I just enjoy it, man. And listen, it's entertainment. Yeah. It's thought-provoking entertainment, and it's not mindless. That's one thing about. One thing, there's different kinds of entertainment. There is such a thing as positive, mindless entertainment. And then there's thought-provoking entertainment. And I appreciate thought-provoking entertainment, So, and the Star Trek people do it.
It's just so cool to see that you have like an appreciation for what Star Trek is and the fandom itself. It's very cool to see. It's
not just surprising to me, but I have to take my hat off to the producers. And first the inventor, and then the producers, and all the technical people that manufacture it. I know on Discovery, I mean, it was being shot like a big movie.
Yeah.
The craftsmanship on that project was amazing. And the Picard show, I haven't seen all of it, but it was an amazing effort. And then the thought-provoking nature of it. I think Star Trek was always designed to be thought-provoking. I think Gene Roddenberry, that was their whole desire, was to make people think. And, in different ways, the thoughts of the original series certainly different than the thoughts of the work that they're doing now. I think now the Star Trek people, as well as the Star Wars people, they get pretty heavy about it. It's pretty heavy stuff. And the one thing about the original series that I think people really enjoy is that it wasn't that heady and heavy. It was fun. It wasn't mindless. I still, when I'll catch an old episode and watch Bill play Captain Kirk and Leonard Nimoy, what he did with Spock, and I take my hats off to them because they were ground floor.
Yeah.
That was at the beginning. I mean, you got to realize when I worked on Star Trek, they were still figuring out the Vulcan salute, and they were still, they didn't have all they didn't have the Star Trek universe yet. It was just building. It's one amazing thing about George Lucas. I know this is Trek, but listen, George is George. With the invention of Star Wars, with Larry Kasdan working as a collaborator with George, he sat down and concocted this giant Bible that has mushroomed and grown into this an unbelievable thing. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, look, just if you look at both franchises,
Yeah.
I certainly respect both. I know that there's a rivalry between the different factions. And that's fine. I guess if people want to have a rivalry, they can have a rivalry. I think there's room in the universe for both Star Trek and Star Wars.
Absolutely. And I'm one of those folks who dares to cross the line between both. So, Clint, I got a few last questions here before we wrap this interview up here. And this is, I'm going to call it my lightning round, even though any guest I've done this before usually hates it because they're like, these are not lightning fast questions, but that's the idea.
Would you like me to make them lightning fast answers?
Let's see if you can. That'll be a curious thing to see if you can do that.
Okay.
So, Clint, let's kick things off here with the first question. Best day on a set and worst day on a set.
Best day on the set was working with Bob Gibson in an episode of Gentle Ben, where I was a big baseball fan as a kid, and when they signed Bob Gibson to be in an episode of Gentle Ben, and I got to meet with him and work with him, that it can't get any better than that. And the worst day on a set, I'm not going to name the show, but the day that I found out the check bounced.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
That was a piss poor day in my life. I work all day, work hard all day, give them an honest day's work, and they stiffed me.
That's pretty damn bad.
As bad as it can get.
Absolutely. You have worked with a ton of actors across the spectrum. Who would you say was the most down to earth, and who, without getting you in trouble, would you say would have been the most pretentious actor to work with?
Nina Foch was a pretentious actress in my mind. My dad had to teach me about what happens when people upstage people. Nina Foch was an old Broadway character actress, and she may have been a very nice lady, but when Dad had to teach me about watching somebody upstage somebody, I would put that into the category of being kind of pretentious. There's been a lot of down to earth actors. Jack Elam was extremely down to earth. He was an old character actor in the 60s and the 70s. He was beautiful. I've worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of down to earth actors.
How about the most challenging role that you ever played that ended up becoming the most rewarding?
Well, I played the lead in a version of The Red Pony, starring Henry Fonda, Maureen O'Hara, and myself, where I played Jody. I played the lead boy in The Red Pony. And that was a big chunk of work for me to do. And at the end of the day, I was really satisfied with my performance. And, I felt like I gave them my very best.
Normally, I ask this next question as, what's the best piece of advice you ever received from somebody that you think about today? But in honor of The Boys, New York Times bestseller, hooray, I want to kind of direct this more towards what's the best piece of advice either of your parents gave you, and what's the best piece of advice your brother ever gave you?
Well, my parents, and with Dad being kind of my acting mentor, it sort of landed more with him. It was the preparation, the simple preparation as an actor, to really listen to your other acting colleagues. You don't wait for your cues, don't think about your cues, but really, really listen and really lock in on somebody's eyes. Locking in on somebody's eyes, I think, is really important. The best piece of advice my brother ever gave me: let the director be the director and you be the actor.
That's a smart piece of advice right there.
Yeah.
You've been working in Hollywood for decades, ever since you were a little itty bitty Clint all the way to today where you're a grown up adult Clint. What would you like to be the legacy of Clint Howard?
All of those things. All of the fact of my longevity and the fact that, I was doing good solid work when I was 5 and 6 years old, and doing good solid work as a senior citizen, and that I make a good, I try my best, and I give people a full day's work. I tell this to a lot of people. Anybody can act at 8 o'clock in the morning. Anybody who wakes up, jumps in the shower, gets cleaned up, goes down to the set, stands around. You're going to be really sharp in the morning, but you got to be good after 13 or 14 hours. You got to be good after, 7 or 8 cups of bad coffee and a horrible second meal at 10 o'clock at night. And then the assistant director is saying, chop, 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 time to go. We got to do this shot. You got to say that, I mean, listen, it's almost the bane of my existence as an actor is a lot of times some of the most difficult work happens under really difficult circumstances. But we're professionals. We have to act, we have to be able to hit a baseball if it's raining or not. We have to be able to play. We have to be able to do our job if the environment is good or if the environment is bad. So listen, hopefully at the end of the day, people will say, by God, Clint was good at that, and he ended up entertaining us.
And last thing for today, Clint, what's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Just the satisfaction of being a part of the universe. The idea that, my goodness, God saw to it that I could play a little part in history. That I don't know, right place, right time. And given that opportunity and it gets celebrated. And also the fact that I pulled my head out of my butt years ago and realized that it was something to celebrate and not something to shy away from.
Yeah.
I'm glad I had that revelation in my head.
Well, I'm glad you did too, because that meant I got a chance to talk to you about all this Star Trek stuff. So that's so awesome. And I legitimately do get to hope I meet you at some point at a convention somewhere, somehow. We got to find a way to get you onto New York, Clint. That's my goal here for this interview. Is find a way to come to New York so I can get a picture with you person to person.
Okay, well, we'll have my peeps talk to your peeps.
Of course. Yeah, we'll do lunch.
Yeah.
But one last time, folks, everybody, Clint and Ron's book, The Boys, check it out. I'm going to have links to it in my show notes below. It's a do not miss book. Highly recommend it. I loved every minute of it. And again, thank you for being so honest and open about your life experiences. Same with your brother as well. Just reading all those stories, getting to know more about you guys. It wasn't just that I'm reading a story about Hollywood luminaries, but more so that it's two people, two human beings, and seeing the ups and downs and the journey you guys went through. So the book is awesome.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and I appreciate it. You were a really good interviewer.
Oh, thank you so much.
Let me say one more thing.
Sure.
You were a really good interviewer, especially for a Trekkie, because sometimes Trekkies, when they do interviews, they geek out, and you didn't geek out much.
Not publicly. Yeah, no, inside. Inside, I'm like that tick that exploded out of your face. But for this interview, I'm trying to keep it cool here.
Well, listen, be well, and hopefully our paths will cross.
I hope so. And as to quote 6-year-old Clint Howard, I hope you've relished this interview as much as I. Now I geeked out. There we go.
Be well.
That's it for this week's show. Thanks again for checking out Trek Untold. If you aren't already, please follow Trek Untold on social media, where you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, among others, all at Trek Untold. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube for the video versions of this show at youtube.com/@TrekUntold, and subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening to the audio version on. We always appreciate likes, shares, comments, thumbs up, ratings, and reviews, and whatever you can do to help spread the word about this podcast and inform other Trekkies about why they need to check this show out. If you're able to financially support this show, visit patreon.com/TrekUntold to learn about the different ways you can contribute to keeping this show going full speed ahead. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.